With the release of the highly successful and arguably the best MCU film Iron Man, there was no doubt that there was going to be a sequel. What we didn't know was that there was going to be a sequel immediately after the first one became successful, which got a release date of 2010 after the first movie was released in 2008. And Iron Man 2 is quite honestly a pretty entertaining movie with a great story. For the most part, I do have some problems with Iron Man 2. It's definitely not as great of a masterpiece as the first movie was. While the first Iron Man movie genuinely was trying to be a movie and tell a compelling, unique story, Iron Man 2 just feels like it was promoting the MCU even more. Now, world building isn't exactly a bad thing. In fact, it can help you immerse yourself into the story even more. And admittedly, Iron Man 2's world building at least tries to tie into the main story, unlike most studios who try to make cinematic universes by having their movies try to connect to other movies that haven't even been made instead of telling a compelling story. The Mummy. Hellboy. Sorry guys, had something stuck in there. For as much as I can defend the world building in Iron Man 2, I must admit the movie would have been so much better if they left out all of the S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff out of the story. Sure, the S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff does move the plot forward, and I'll admit Scarlett Johansson's pretty hot. Iron Man 2 already has a ton of plot threads, like War Machine, Hammer Industries, Tony Stark dying of the very arc reactor that's supposed to be keeping him alive, and of course the main villain's side story of, legacy and all of that. There's just so many plot threads that adding the S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff really does hinder the story a lot. Had the S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff been removed and the plot tweaked a little bit, this movie could have genuinely been something special, but unfortunately, a lot of the stuff that could have made the movie great was left in the cutting room in favor of the S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff, therefore, we kinda get a somewhat decent plot, but a bit messy. The plot of the movie is about Tony Stark, after having been Iron Man for 6 months, slowly dying because of the arc reactor that's keeping him alive is also slowly poisoning him. And so he's kinda having this existential crisis where he's trying to do everything he can just before he dies to make sure that the world he leaves behind remains safe. But this also kinda makes him a bit cocky and much more of a free spirit than he's supposed to be, to the point where he kinda misuses the Iron Man suit. But all of this immaturity is because he's slowly dying, and so he's trying to live out the best days of his life. And it's also kind of the reason why later in the plot, he gives away the Mark II suit to Rhodey, who turns it into the War Machine suit. I mean, if he's going to give away an Iron Man suit, he might as well give it to somebody he trusts before he dies. But uh-oh, what's this? It's Ivan Vanko, a new villain, aka Whiplash, who's the son of an inventor who used to work with Tony Stark's dad, Howard Stark. Let's just say Ivan Vanko's dad wasn't exactly a good person, which gave a reason for Howard Stark to deport him, and because of that, Ivan Vanko's dad had like this sort of grudge towards the Stark family, and he passed that grudge on to his son. What makes Ivan Vanko an especially threatening villain is the fact that he managed to recreate the miniature arc reactor that is keeping Tony alive, and so he's essentially an evil Iron Man. Like, that hasn't been done enough. Now there's a lot to unpack here. I mean, Ivan Vanko sounds like an interesting villain who's got a lot of backstory to him, and he sounds like he's the foil to Tony Stark. Not to mention his entire motivation of ending the Stark legacy, or at least making the Stark legacy look bad. Honestly, that sounds really good in a movie where Tony Stark is slowly dying, and this whole theme of attacking the legacy, and just what are you going to leave behind after you die. All of this sounds interesting. The problem is, it doesn't really get explored enough. I mean, it's there, and it does play a big role in the movie, but it doesn't play as big of a role as it should be. Like I said, there's a lot of plot threads in the movie that also need attention, so all of this just isn't as focused as I think it should be. Not to mention, there's another villain in the movie in the form of Justin Hammer, who, while is a pretty fun character, just isn't as interesting as Ivan Vanko, and yet he gets a lot of screen time, but just no development. And once again, Justin Hammer is a foil to Tony Stark. He's basically Tony if he never got the Iron Man suit, but also never changed his ways, and yeah, he's basically an evil Iron Man, and yeah, we already have one evil Iron Man in the movie, why do we need another one? Like I've said before, there's a lot of plot threads that Iron Man 2 has. There's the plot thread of Pepper Potts becoming the CEO of Stark Industries. There's also a part where Rhodey manages to get the Iron Man suit and he becomes a war machine. Stark's whole existential crisis thing, finding a new element. Now, I'm not saying that you can't find a way to make all these plot threads work together, and for the most part, it at least works together that it isn't bad, but it could have been done better, especially if you just had taken out the shield stuff, but okay, I've already complained about that. Despite the multiple plot threads, when the plot threads come together and the plot gets good, it gets really good. The whole arc and theme of Tony Stark in this movie is legacy. Tony Stark is slowly dying and he can't be Iron Man forever. Not to mention, the government wants to get their hands on the suit, and so he has to do everything he can before he dies to make sure that when he dies, the world is in good hands. That's why he makes Pepper Potts CEO of Stark Industries, because he trusts her to do the job, and also why he gave away the suit to Rhodey instead of anyone else, because he can trust him to be the one and only War Machine. Not to mention, he gets to learn about the legacy that Howard Stark left behind, and learning that his father really did love him, and he also left behind a new element that ironically manages to save his life. It's all of these emotional scenes and Tony learning about the legacy and what he wants to do with that legacy is what makes this movie really good. The plot threads are messy, admittedly, but despite all the bad stuff, there's just as much good stuff that makes Iron Man 2 worth giving a watch, or at least I don't think it's as bad as most people are saying it is. Not to mention that Justin Hammer dance. You gotta admit, that's actually a pretty funny scene. It elevates the movie to a 7 out of 10 star rating. The movie is not bad, alright? It has its flaws, but it's not bad.